Affairs, Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, Government of Kenya. We are going to have that conversation of climate security with the support of Ambassador Dr. Monica Juma, Dr. Susan Gardner, Her Excellency Jennifer Morgan, His Excellency Rolf Mazou. We will also be joined by Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, together with His Excellency Ambassador Majid Al-Swahidi, and last but not least, Dr. Sebilami. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure right now to invite our moderator for the day, Dr. Abraham Sing'oei, Principal Secretary, Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, Government of Kenya, to lead us through the process. Welcome, Doctor.
There you go. Apparently you have to perform some magical acts. Well, Excellencies, allow me first and foremost to welcome you again to Nairobi. Taking the cue from His Excellency, the President of the Republic, we are really very, very privileged to have all of you here today. This is the panel on climate and security nexus. So climate change is an existential threat that bears disproportionately on Africa's food and security, threatens livelihood, including tourism, and damages already weak and inadequate infrastructure. In sum, climate change impairs the ability of the continent to meet sustainable development goals. Indeed, it's said that climate change is a crisis multiplier, and it is. Now, this fragility caused by climate change is likely to lead to conflict and exacerbate unemployment and foster an environment of instability and radicalization. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, climate security nexus has not been well developed or incorporated into our planning metrics. This panel will examine this challenge and propose a proactive response by states, regional, and global multilateral institutions. It is my pleasure now to welcome the panelists to take their seats on the podium. It is my pleasure to welcome, and I can see that Ambassador Monica Juma is yet to arrive, but hopefully she will join us in due course. I want to welcome His Excellency Rolf Mazou to join me here on the podium. I want to welcome Dr. Susan Gardner to equally come up. Her Excellency Jennifer Morgan, very pleased to see you. I know for sure that Dr. Adesina is not here yet. I'm quite certain, but I don't know whether there is a representative from the Africa Development Bank as yet. It's also my pleasure to invite Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi to come up. Thank you very much. I think the way we will proceed, ladies and gentlemen, is that I will ask each of the panelists to make an opening statement for about 5 minutes. At the end of their opening statements, we will then be able to invite a conversation with all of us. We will open up the session for you to be able to pose questions and to posit responses to what these eminent speakers, these eminent panelists will have already spoken to. And so without further ado, allow me to start by inviting each of the panelists to make their opening statement, starting with Her Excellency Jennifer Morgan. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, Excellencies, friends and colleagues. It's good to be back in Nairobi. I was actually here in July as we co-hosted the Berlin Climate and Security Conference, Nairobi, here together with Kenya to create and support an African-led debate from that conference on climate, peace, and security, and I couldn't be more pleased to follow up on that today, and pleased to see the incoming presidency for the COP here as well, so we know we'll keep moving. Maybe just a few thoughts from some of the work that we've been doing. First of all, it's very embedded in the way that Germany is thinking about our security issues right now. We've just released a first ever national security strategy in Germany, and in that strategy it says that fighting the climate crisis and dealing with its consequences is humanity's central task in this century, and our foremost aim must be to drastically reduce global emissions, which are still currently on the rise, and we must achieve results and do so urgently, and at the same time we must pursue adaptation strategies that limit the impact of the climate crisis. If I take that and I kind of put it within the context of the discussion we had here in Nairobi, we actually, there was a Nairobi declaration that was released on climate and security. It had 6 main areas, which I think maybe could help our discussion today. The first is about mobilizing climate finance for peace in Africa, really supporting those communities that whose stability and peace are most affected by climate and environment-related risks, by enhancing their right to climate action, opportunities, and bringing climate finance into fragile contexts. The second is climate security risk-informed resilience and adaptation, really connecting these dots with multilateral development banks, climate finance institutions and development partners to improve the financing of resilience and adaptation in the wide range of the risks. The third is climate security risk-informed peace building, and really looking at how to integrate climate knowledge and climate and environmental degradation into early warning systems, into mediation, into keeping other peace operations to avoid that vicious cycle where climate and environmental degradation are just worsen the drivers of conflict. Fourth is ensuring the protection and durable solutions for persons displaced by the impacts of climate change. Fifth is continued political leadership, which I think is important to bring these different communities together. And the sixth is knowledge and experience sharing. And on that, I'll just wrap up by mentioning the Climate for Peace initiative, which is an initiative that came out of the G7, the German G7 last year. And there's out of the Environment, Peace, and Security Declaration by G7 foreign ministers. The idea of the Climate for Peace initiative is to really go on the ground and look at what is happening on the ground, to move away from theory that we know that climate and security are linked, we know about the conflict multipliers. And so there's now a group of 25 countries, including most recently Kenya, which is excellent, who are implementing and exchanging practices. We'll have another Berlin Climate and Security Conference meeting coming up soon. Just two examples for climate and security experts. I think these are ones that you know very well. But one is in Nigeria, which is supported by Climate for Peace and the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. Basically, there was a local farmer-herder conflict, and they worked to help local stakeholders negotiate a peace agreement between the Konchishu and the Oju in the Benue state in Nigeria. It was just signed last month. And it contains agreements on resource, soil, water use, and market access, and also border lines, so bringing those together. And one here, right here in Kenya, which is working, where Ireland is working together with Kenya, is in the West Pokot County. We know extremely vulnerable to climate shocks. And there it's, again, to engage different conflict partners in developing climate adaptation strategies together, so that you bring peace and resiliency into the adaptation strategies and the adaptation plans themselves. I think it's time we need to get serious about this. I look forward to hearing more of the practical implementation, because lives are so at stake, and we need to be learning from each other and seeing how we can avoid conflict and improve people's lives who are really on the front line. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause to the State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action, Federal Republic of Germany. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Ruf Mazou, the Assistant High Commissioner in charge of Operations, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, to speak. Welcome.
Thank you very much, PS, and really pleased to be here with you on this panel. There are more than 108.4 million refugees and other displaced persons around the world. And as many of you know, this is an unprecedented number, and we are unfortunately seeing this number increase every year. 36.3 million of them are on the African continent. We are, and you said it, PS, we are increasingly having a better understanding of the correlation between some of the effects of climate change and displacement. We're also seeing a very high percentage of displaced persons on this continent living in locations heavily impacted by climate change. Climate change clearly plays the role of an accelerator, and its consequences are often the root causes of displacements. Hence the importance of resilience programs and interventions which take into consideration changing weather patterns, changes in the availability of water, for instance. The complex relation between farmers and pastoralists definitely is one that is affected by climate change and requires attention on our part. The African continent, as we all know, is particularly affected by climate change. Drought in the Horn and in the Sahel, floods in South Sudan, cyclones in southern Africa. Dadaab, where we were on Sunday with the Director General of COP28, Ambassador Majid Al-Swaidy, is an example. It was opened more than 30 years ago for Somalis fleeing the war. And for a long time, it had the unwanted reputation of being the largest refugee camp in the world. Many of these refugees came as a result of a combination of drought and conflict. Their presence has also had an impact on the environment, depleting forests as refugees needed to collect firewood, and to a certain extent also affecting water reserves. Another example that I could mention includes the situation in the Lake Chad basin and, of course, displacement in the Sahel region. Drought leading to poverty, leading to conflicts. What is more important is that we find ways of being part of the solution, now that I've, to a certain extent, stated what the problem is. Partnering with development actors to invest in areas affected by changing weather patterns to preempt conflict over natural resources. Providing sustainable support to refugee communities to ensure that they are not compelled to deplete the environment of the region which has welcomed them. Ensuring that the refugee population reaches the highest degree of self-reliance as fast as possible, and avoiding the dependency that we have seen in Dadaab, for instance. I believe there is a special role for regional organizations, and IGAD in particular, whose climate action strategy we are supporting, but also the SADC and regional organizations in West Africa. We often talk about more resources that are required. It's not just more resources, but I would say that it's also better resources. Resources that must be geared towards prevention. We have discussed about financing adaptation. It is essential to break this ascending spiral of forced displacement numbers powered by the effect of climate change. The various new climate financing initiatives announced by some of the speakers this morning would be a welcome development, and it is essential that they include provisions for addressing forced displacement brought about by climate change. It's also of crucial importance to to ensure comprehensive involvement of all partners. Local partners, which must play a central role, but also central government, development partners, but also humanitarian partners, but also the private sector, including those who spoke so eloquently of the negative effect of climate change this morning. One example of such coordinated approach that I witnessed was the meeting that took place in Niamey, Niger, in January around the Lake Chad basin. We need more of these initiatives of bringing everybody, all partners together to address the effects of climate change. Let me conclude, PS, by just a few commitments that we as an organization want to do. First, we believe that we should take advantage of the upcoming GRF, the Global Refugee Forum, which will take place in Geneva in December, to scale up climate action-related pledges. We also will, in the 4 regions of Africa, we will continue to accelerate the development of 4 regional climate action plans. We believe that inclusive early warning systems are absolutely crucial. We also believe that some of the settlements or camps that we have must be made more resilient and more sustainable, and this is something that we are working on. We also must strengthen the legal framework to ensure that people who find themselves displaced in context of forced displacement are protected. And we are committed to making data available, quality data and knowledge available to our partners. And lastly, we believe, and I mentioned that earlier, that the efforts that are being made by IGAD to have a regional climate adaptation strategy, which is developed by the Center of Excellence for Climate Change Adaptation and Environmental Protection, is crucial, and will continue to provide support not only to IGAD, but also, as I mentioned earlier, to SADC and the African Development Bank. Lastly, and I would like to conclude here, to commend and congratulate Kenya for the Shirika plan that it has launched a few months ago. It is about shifting from a mainly or purely humanitarian response to one that moves towards self-reliance, and we need more of such initiatives around the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for your very practical ideas on this subject. It is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Susan Gardner, the Director, Ecosystem Division within UNEP, to give her intervention. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share some reflections from the perspective of the UN system on this important topic, and our appreciation, excellencies, and to Kenya for dedicating the time and attention to this critical issue. In the Secretary General's new agenda for peace, he calls to recognize climate, peace, and security as a political priority and strengthen connections between multilateral bodies to ensure that climate action and peace building reinforce each other. In fact, the IPCC Assessment Synthesis report, recently published this year, finds that climate change impacts will become increasingly complex and more difficult to manage with every increment and warning. And multiple risk drivers will increasingly interact, like biodiversity losses, food insecurity, competition for land, violent conflicts, all creating compounding and cascading risks across various sectors and regions. Now, it's great to see that Africa is already making important strides in addressing the interlinkages between climate, peace, and security. And we see that many nationally determined contributions from African countries, including here in Kenya, recognize climate change as a security issue, understanding how it worsens conflict dynamics and in some cases actually prevents climate action. So this summit, and in fact this panel today, really underlines the importance of this topic as a political priority for the continent. To start tackling complex climate-related security risks, the UN has developed some mechanisms for addressing the issue, including the UN Climate Security Mechanism, which is a joint initiative between 4 different UN agencies. UNEP is proud to be among them, that draws on our various complementary expertise in areas of peace building, in peacekeeping, and sustainable development, and of course, the environment, to integrate climate security analyses and actions across our political and programmatic work. While we've started making some progress, it's also critical now to scale up action to address climate-related risks to peace. And the new agenda for peace calls for new joint regional hubs on climate, peace, and security to connect national and regional experiences, to provide technical advice to member states, and to help accelerate progress on this agenda. And you'll hear more about this, I think, from the panel. Environmental approaches have an important role in addressing and lessening the climate-related risks to peace. At UNEP, we draw on science to understand the emerging environmental governance challenges, impartial scientific evidence and analysis, including climate projections and modeling, including all of the different aspects where we can bring scientific information to bear, can help us to identify the emerging challenges and craft optimal solutions for these challenges. UNEP's cooperation with the EU on climate change and security has tested how integrated climate change adaptation, conflict prevention, and peace-building approaches together can contribute to strengthen resilience, and this can be seen even at the local level. Shared environment governance arrangements can help states and regions to manage resources in a way that's peaceful, where we can find win-win solutions. For example, in Somalia, UNEP and IOM are partnering to break the climate displacement conflict cycle by implementing early interventions with a nature-based focus in areas that are susceptible to climate shocks and under displacement pressure. In North Darfur, for example, UNEP facilitated water cooperation and supported effective, inclusive natural resource management to improve relationships over the issues of water resources and therefore contributing importantly to peace and climate adaptation as well as sustainable agriculture. We know from the various speeches and speakers that we have heard today and will be hearing this week, climate change knows no boundaries, and we need to understand how climate action can interact with local, national, and regional dynamics, and how these dynamics play out either positively or negatively. There is important progress, but the job is not yet done, and there is a need, as we've heard from other speakers already, for more climate finance. Again, this is an area where the new agenda for peace calls for more risk-tolerant climate finance mechanisms. So to conclude, I'd just like to reflect that, not just so many years back, it might have been unusual for us to have had a discussion around peace and security at an international climate change forum like this one. But today, peace and security rightly has its place on the climate change agenda. And this is very good news that Africa is ahead of the curve in recognizing these interlinkages between climate, peace, and security. At UNEP, we remain committed to addressing some of these gaps facing the continent in providing impartial scientific evidence on the nexus between climate change and conflict, and ensuring that climate finance contributes also to sustaining peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner, for your very apropos commentary on this subject. It is my pleasure now to invite Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi, the Director General, COP28, United Arab Emirates. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, friends, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion on the nexus between climate and security in Africa. While conversations and negotiations on climate change tend to focus on mitigation, adaptation, and finance, the climate and security nexus is increasingly evident across each of these work streams. There is broad recognition that climate change is a multidimensional challenge with far-reaching consequences on our collective health and well-being, our access to food and water, the availability of jobs and livelihoods, and our access to social protections. This has clear repercussions on efforts to maintain peace and security, and we remain deeply concerned about the humanitarian burden and instability inflicted by climate change. These are the concerns that the UAE is prioritizing throughout its time on the UN Security Council, and which the COP28 presidency will reflect in our action agenda for COP28. Friends, addressing such interconnected impacts are a challenge to even the most developed nations and communities. But for those in fragile contexts, they can add pressure to already strained systems and exacerbate vulnerable conditions. Added to the dilemma is the reality that it is often countries with high humanitarian needs or security challenges that receive the least support to address climate impacts. As outlined in recent studies by UNDP and the World Bank, these countries receive vastly below average support, and over half of the 25 countries considered the least ready to adapt to climate change are affected by conflict or security challenges. It is clear that more support must be provided to enable climate action in contexts dealing with multifaceted crisis. The COP28 presidency is committed to addressing this. I'm pleased to announce that the work is underway on a new pact on fragility to launch at COP28 during our dedicated day on relief, recovery, and peace. Developed with the support of Kenya through the State Department of Foreign Affairs and Germany and several others, this pact aims to galvanize support from the international community in fragile contexts. It asks partners to put forward concrete initiatives to alleviate current barriers to climate action and finance. Specifically, it urges donors and international finance partners to introduce systematic changes such as greater flexibility in operating procedures and scaled-up risk mitigation instruments to help expedite finance flows. And it aims to introduce conflict-sensitive guidance for climate programming of financiers and calls for initiatives to enhance the absorption capacity of governments. In addition to the pact, the COP28 presidency will build on the experiences of civil society and peace-building and humanitarian actors and champion the rollout of additional measures. This includes early warning for all, nature-based solutions, and adaptive social protection as a vehicle to protect the most vulnerable. I count on each one of you to stand behind us in this agenda. Friends, this pact has been built on consultations by the COP28 presidency across governments, multilateral partners, civil society groups, finance providers, and it reflects the widespread concerns amongst stakeholders that countries in the most vulnerable, fragile contexts face significant barriers to climate finance and support, particularly around much-needed adaptation and resilience building. And is too often the case, it is women, children, and other marginalized groups who suffer the brunt of these impacts. We welcome recent developments that help to address these concerns. This includes the Intergovernmental Authority on the Development, IGAD Climate Security Coordination Mechanism, and the related UN Climate, Peace and Security Hub for the Horn of Africa. This hub, the first of its kind and a model for future regional support, will align with IGAD's coordination mechanism and help to strengthen the capacity of regional, national, and local actors to address the linkages between climate, peace, and security. It will provide a multi-donor financing mechanism aimed at increasing access to climate finance for adaptation and sustaining peace in the Horn of Africa. This multi-partner, multi-sectoral approach aligns well with the Nairobi Statement on Climate Change, Peace and Security and Stability, which outlines clear priorities to adapt to and mitigate against climate change-induced peace and security challenges on the continent. The COP28 presidency aims to support and build upon such initiatives. The COP28 action agenda includes prioritizing efforts to fix climate finance, as well as refocus efforts on people and communities. We hope to use these priorities to elevate initiatives such as the coordination mechanism and the regional hub and any others like it that we hope to see emerge at COP28. The thematic day on relief, recovery, and peace will be a key moment for such initiatives to take center stage and to include fragile countries and vulnerable groups in the conversation. Excellencies, colleagues, yesterday I had the opportunity to visit the Dadaab refugee camp. I spoke with women, men, and children that have fled conflict in Somalia and have seen their lives and livelihoods further impacted by prolonged drought, and that has limited access to water, fueled food insecurity and famine, and left many without jobs or livelihoods. They are not alone. The OECD estimates that 2.2 billion people, or 26% of the global population, will live in fragile states by 2030. They are simultaneously those on the front line of climate impacts and the least equipped to manage the effects. This is not only impractical, it's immoral. We cannot forsake billions of people to the worst, earliest impacts for which they are woefully unprepared. This goes far beyond the host country, the host community, and far beyond the capacity of humanitarian actors. The COP28 presidency has been clear from day one that we will leave no one behind in our approach to climate action. and that fundamentally includes those who need our support the most. I look forward to continuing our work with Kenya and Germany and to working with each of you to elevate this issue and to deliver meaningful results. And I thank you very much for this discussion today.
Thank you, Ambassador Majid, for your thoughtful comments, and thank you for visiting Dadaab. So I'd like to really open this up for your input, for your questions, your observations, and your very brief comment to the panelists. I see, let me see, just by a show of hands, how many people are interested in making a comment. All right, we have 3 hands already. We could start right there. 2, 3, please. Could we help the mic? Could we get some help with the mics, please? Morgan, yes.
I would like to ask, on the policy level, international global approach, what would be the next step forward? As we have seen, the nexus between climate, peace, and security is gaining ground, is being more and more recognized, is not questioned so much as it before, thanks for the work done by the countries you represent, by the international organizations you represent. But what would be the important political step forward as well in the future?
Thank you, Your Excellency. I think the question is one that is very important, Your Excellency, Minister Morgan, because Germany has done a lot of work in this regard. It has used its leadership in the G7 to advance the climate security nexus. It's working now with a number of countries, including Kenya, to really begin to develop principles and norms and cohere around a programmatic set of responses. And so I think the question asked by Slovenia in terms of what do you see this going? Where do you see this going in terms of the next steps, particularly given what we consider to be the lack of adequate appetite on the part of UNSC to really move forward on this issue? Next question.
My name is Shabra Anati from Kenya. First, I need to appreciate government for leading this effort to introduce the nexus between security and climate. My intention of attending this conference was to see harmonization of the narrative. And I'm seated here to the speakers who have spoken. Because they have linked food systems, climate security, all
Thank you very much, Shadrach. Next question, please.
I'm wondering how we're going to make sure, or whether you are going to make sure that climate finance will also reach the most vulnerable communities. My name is Teresa Less. I would like to give a short background. So I work with the Children Peace Initiative in Kenya, a small organization, and we work in the North Rift Valley region in Kenya with the Pokot and Chamos communities. These pastoralist communities are currently killing and fighting each other in cattle raids. These cattle raids take place because during the last years of drought, around 90% of these people's cattle died. So what they are now doing is they raiding each other, trying to make up for their loss by stealing cattle from other tribes. The response after the last cattle raid from the government was to promise local leaders that more weapons will be distributed to these communities so they can defend themselves from these raiders. These actions neither address or help reduce death and the general issue, nor does it help these people solve the actual root issue, which is that they are struggling to survive because the lifestyle they know is just not working anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question of the extent to which, or rather what can be done to ensure that climate finances reach the local level. It's a conversation we're having at another panel, and the question was raised by a subnational unit about what can be done to smarten access to climate finances by local authorities. Thank you very much. A final question before I ask the panelists to speak. I see two questions, but yeah. Thank you very much. I think there is one final question we will take.
My question is around how there's been a lot of discussion around how financing for adaptation needs more focus. And I think a lot of the traction that has been in favor of mitigation is numerous, but one of those is the fact that we have a goal, staying under 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that allows for a lot of subnational and national initiatives to fall into place behind that goal. How do we achieve or reach a similar goal on the adaptation side? Is it feasible, and how do we get there?
Thank you very much. All right, we'll stop there for now. We will have a second round of questions. And I want to ask the panelists to respond to those questions without any preference. So it just really depends on what you think speaks to your particular area of competence. We can start with UNHCR or Your Excellency, Jennifer Morgan, please. And there are mics next to you. You could use those ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. I'll try and share a few thoughts from my side. I mean, I think part of what we need to do, I have three different points. The first is scaling up what we know is working. And that's kind of part of what whether it be informing peace-building missions and trainings, bringing scaled information on impacts into local communities so that they can actually be building resilience and adapting, and that would also bring it into adaptation plans. So scaling that up, getting the early warning systems in place. I think we know quite a lot of the types of the activities, quite practically, that can help on the resilience side of things, and that's part of what the Climate for Peace initiative is. But I would like it to see maybe at the COP that we say, okay, these are the things that we think we know are working in many different contexts, fragile contexts around the world. Let's scale those, let's crystallize those, let's get some financing behind them, let's scale those up together with those who are really on the front line, with those who are in the field and trying to make things happen. So that's one, is just scaling it up and getting serious and not trying to, maybe you can't cover everything, but we know quite a lot. The second is around, it's a mixture of kind of local communities and climate finance, and I mean, a lot of this is also around anticipatory action, and I'm keen to listen here as well. It links with the adaptation goal. Part of me thinks that we shouldn't get too hung up on categories or labels, because we would end up in negotiations for a long time about different types of countries and whether they should have access to finance or not. But rather to be looking at we know fragile states, for example, are extremely vulnerable. We know of the type of activities that could come in. How do we get those into the national adaptation plans, get the funding to those so that the activities could actually get funded? Like, that's kind of bringing it more into the climate space. I think you were also looking, okay, how do you bring it over into the non-climate finance space? And I think that's even more challenging. The loss and damage negotiations are ongoing right now. I think once that moves into kind of what are the types of preventing, averting, preventing, and addressing could come in there. And optimally on local communities, that's where we know we have to move towards, or not only move towards, we know that that's where the information is. So perhaps at the COP we could try and see how, as national governments, we can be committing to empower local governments to be able to receive the funds, every country is different, but I think that could be perhaps one link into the adaptation goal. And lastly, maybe just on where we go from here, I'd also like to make the connection to the mitigation side of things, because actually phasing out fossil fuels and phasing up renewable energy and energy efficiency is a security response. I think where the NATO is opening up a best practice center in Canada soon, but I think oftentimes the communities are so separate. But if our military and security community understands, actually we have to have global emissions in 7 years. We have to phase out fossil fuels, and that's in our national security interest to avoid conflicts. I think that's another thing we should bring more into the rooms and into the discussions, whether it be in Slovenia, where I was so sorry I couldn't be there, but or other places, because we have to think all of this together.
No, thank you very much for all the questions. Just briefly, how do we make sure that the programs that are being implemented are the right ones and are responding to the needs of the people who are affected? I think their involvement in defining and designing the programs that are going to be implemented is absolutely key. We often say that, but I think it is important to do that. And I think when we were in Dadaab yesterday, you hear from people what they need, and when they tell you what they need, they don't need unlimited humanitarian assistance. They need ways to become self-reliant. So many of the questions that we are asking find answers when we discuss with those who are most affected. The second point that I would like to underline is when we look at resources, we should also look at how do we better use the resources that are currently being spent and being used. And I'm now focusing more on the response to forced displacement. it is absolutely crucial that we put more resources in making sure that we reach some level of self-reliance and sustainability for the population that we're talking about. This is absolutely crucial. So it's not necessarily more resources in this case, but it's more resources used differently. The last point that I would like to make on resources, we speak often of private sector. What we also need to look at is the private sector in the communities that are displaced. Communities that are displaced are still private sector actors, and we need to make sure that we create the environment for them to continue to be these private sector actors that they were before displacement, that they are often in situation of informal sector. So these are the points that I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Well, certainly a lot of very important and very difficult issues have been raised. One thing that we've heard across this panel, and in fact in the previous panel earlier today on energy transition, is about those interactions, about how essential it is that we ensure that we have a mindset of understanding the interactions of all these different effects, such as what was raised by the colleague from Kenya about food security. When we were in the conversation around energy in the last panel, we were hearing about those interactions with gender, that combination, urban, rural interactions, entrepreneurship, air pollution, they're all connected. In the UN system, through the country teams, we try to reach across our mandates in order to ensure that we're looking at how we address things together, that we're seeing the whole complementary perspective, expertise, and quite frankly, budgets to work on these things together. And it's a coordinated approach that allows humanitarian work to be also viewing the connection to development, to policy. I think a great example of this is the recent MOU signed between the World Food Program and UNEP in looking at how do we help to ensure that delivery on the field, in the country, can also build resilience from investing in nature-based solutions. Because we have a lot of the solutions at our hands, and I agree with my colleagues who said we need to look at better finance. I know in Vancouver a couple weeks ago in the Global Environment Facility, the discussions around funding was a lot about streamlining funding, making it more accessible, and ensuring that it's that idea of the better finance. Because there are so many of the solutions that are available that are known, that we need to just ensure that the resources and the attention is getting to the places where the action is the most important. Thank you.
Thank you to the questions. It strikes me that the questions kind of go at multiple levels in terms of how we think about things, from the kind of on the ground question we had about the specifics of the pastoralists, you know, and their issues, to the question we had about adaptation and the targets that we need to set. And so I'd love to kind of tackle it in that way, starting from the ground and the visit that we had to Dadaab yesterday. It seems like a long time ago, but it was yesterday. And I want to stress why we went there. And me and my team, and thanks to the UNHCR people and the government of Kenya who were able to make it happen, went there because we at COP28 believe that we want to have an inclusive process, and we want to give a voice to those people on the ground in our process. And so we take that very seriously. And when we went there, we visited with the local community, the local Kenyan community, who were impacted by the influx of the migrants. And we heard from them about the need for investment in their resilience, not only those of the migrants who were coming, but also, by the way, they are in a drought-ridden area, so the climate is impacting them at a local level, and that speaks to the question that you brought about. How are we finding solutions for them? The migrants, their message, we asked them many times, what is the message that you would like us to deliver at the Africa Climate Summit tomorrow? And for them, it was about the fact that they had to leave their homes because of drought, because of conflict, because they want to have a better life for their children. We heard that time and time again. They wanted to be able to simply live in a peaceful situation, provide water, healthcare, and education. Education kept coming back up time and time again. We met with the women from the local community. That was the message that we heard. And then there were two interactions that I really found very sort of impactful for me. One was with a young lady who had traveled from Somalia. There was an elderly lady who I think walked for 22 days. She was 75 years old, and she'd walked for 22 days to reach the Dadaab camp. And if you've ever been to this region, it's a very tough to imagine a 75-year-old woman walking for 22 days. And the second was a young lady who had 9 children who'd managed to get her children from that conflict situation into the camp, and she felt much happier. But what she was asking for was how she could find jobs for her older children and how she could provide education for the children that she had so that they could have a better life. And so it really struck me, the point that you're saying is that they're not asking for money, actually. They're not they're asking for an opportunity to adapt to a better situation and to be able to build resilience. The second interaction that frankly is the one that I still think about now was when we were talking to the women in the community. It was some of the younger girls who spoke up and said, we would like to raise the fact that we don't have access to latrines, that we have to walk at night into the bush or a long distance, and we're subject to risk and violence and so on and so forth. And in the conversation we learned that there was one latrine for every 100 people in that camp. These solutions are actually simple solutions. We know the answer to these things. It doesn't require really complex policies or international frameworks or complex discussions. It just requires simply providing safe latrines to young women in these situations and creating safe environments for them. We know the answers to these situations. We need to deliver those solutions, and we need to deliver them quickly because these people need them now. They don't need them by COP 29, 30, 40. They need them today. And so we need to think about that. And I think that that's really important because I want to give a voice to those people who we went to visit with and that we promised we would give a voice to. And I think that we have to, in our conversations, remember that it has to be about those people. It has to be about those young girls, and it has to be about those ladies, and it has to be about those families, and it has to be about the agencies who are helping them and how we can solve for the problems that we can get to. The next level up is the question that we had about food security and food systems. We tend to think about that. One of the things that really struck us was that there were opportunities to provide them a chance to adapt from a pastoral kind of lifestyle to perhaps a more agrarian lifestyle with some investment in their development. So you're moving from a kind of humanitarian posture to a development posture, and that takes political will. And the food systems conversation is not just one that is about those people in those humanitarian vulnerable situations. It's also about countries like ours who are dependent on food security because we depend on food supplies from around the world. We live in an integrated world today where food is shared amongst us all, and we all have an interest in learning how we better improve our food systems and how we improve the resilience that we have in a changing environment to the food supplies and how we can improve that. The next question was about how we could do things better. And I think that this was where we were talking earlier. We know that there are practitioners on the ground. There were people who spoke to us in that camp who said we need to do X, Y, Z to improve the situation of the people on the ground. We know that there is somewhat of a political, and the lady from, the ambassador from Slovenia said this, generally speaking there's political acceptance now, but it's not it's not 100%. So we need to move to that 100% recognition and political support that says this is an important issue in the climate conversation and we need to address it, and that's what we want to deliver at COP28. And then we need to fill the gap in between. We were talking about this earlier. We need to fill the gap in between of how we bridge from that political momentum to the policies that are required to get us to the action that happens on the ground. And that's where the gentleman's point about having clear goals for adaptation, for resilience, for loss and damage is very, very important. And let's not forget that COP28 is mandated to deliver a global goal on adaptation. This was agreed. This is not a choice. This is something that has to happen. And as part of that, we have to double adaptation finance. And we have to see shareholders, donor countries, and others who are able to step up and help to support these kinds of activities, taking that step forward, because frankly, this is not just about a them and us conversation. This is about all of us helping to create a more resilient world that is in all of our interests. And as a COP28 team, we are committed to that, but we need your help to try to achieve that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Majid, for taking time to really go granular on the kind of response that is required and the keenness with which COP28 is focusing its attention on making COP28 the kind of summit that will deliver even bigger but also better results for that matter, and we really appreciate that. I appreciate all the panelists for their initial commentary. I think there was one other question before we close this session. So I'll just do a final round of questions. And so I want to see how many people we need questions from. We will start with you, sir, because you had your hand first. You, sir. You, sir. I want to see a final lady. I want to see a lady in the final. Okay. Let's start here. Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you very much. Committed, yes.
My question is, where do we stand? How much money we were able to disperse? Because like His Excellency was saying, we don't need to wait until COP28, 29, 30 to be dispersing that money. It is urgent, and the urgency is now, not tomorrow.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next question, please. Let's make it as brief.
I will be very short. Martin Frick with the World Food Program. Just to recognize His Excellency the visited Dakar. And sir, I think you are spot on. The people are not asking for money. They are not asking for donation. They are asking for opportunity. And in Dakar, you still have something around 350 millimeters of rainfall. Wisely managed agriculture is possible. Agriculture and pastorism. And that doesn't have to be a conflict. There can be a synergy if we use indigenous knowledge, if we use what we know, and if we can also get instruments such as the Green Climate Fund to really invest in the most vulnerable communities to build their future from the bottom.
Thank you very much, sir. Final question. Mzee Sei. Make it brief, sir.
Thank you.
the end of this conference, right across the nation, people in the rural area know that something has taken place in Nairobi and it belongs to Nairobi. There are so many initiatives at the grassroots level that need assistance of one nature or one kind or another. How can finance be put in such a way that the people at the grassroots can access, because there is work going on right now. We are not starting the agenda. There is work going on, and people give us tools, and we will enhance the work on the ground. How can the money be channeled to those grassroots initiatives?
Thank you very much. I think that's a recurring theme. It happened in the first set of questions. We're hearing it again. Let me go back to the panelists for their final and concluding observations. Thank you very much. If you have any responses.
No, maybe you want responses, or you want us to conclude, or have you? Yes. No. First, thank you very much. I think this panel is great. I focus primarily on the issue of forced displacement, but it's clear that we have to look beyond forced displacement. So maybe 7 quick points to conclude the points that were made. First, the understanding of the scale of the problem. We all realize that the number of people who are displaced is increasing at an extremely rapid pace, and we have to deal with it, and we have to deal with it through finding ways of preventing additional movement that indirectly results from climate change. Second thing is the involvement of all actors, starting with the persons who are affected by climate change. Regional actors, the importance of regional actors. We see how crucial it is when countries come around the table together to find solutions to issues that are affecting them. Drought does not know borders, and that's something that we have to be conscious of. It has been said before, but it's always better to repeat it. Leave no one behind. Refugees, forcibly displaced persons are often left behind, and it is crucial. And we're very pleased to hear Director General of the next COP saying that he does not want to leave people behind, and that people who are displaced will also be a center in the response that is going to be provided. Lastly, and it was said by a colleague, I think, from WFP, contexts like Dadaab are actually contexts where it is possible to do agriculture. It requires different type of investments and resources that we humanitarian actors have, but we need to bring development actors, we need to bring private sector in this kind of context to reduce the need of humanitarian assistance and make people self-reliant. Thank you very much.
Well, currently to meet the NDCs of the countries in Africa would require about $2.8 trillion between 2020 and 2030. And at the moment, the continent's receiving only a fraction of that. The longer that we take globally to decarbonize, the less we're investing in decarbonization, the slower we are to respond, the more warming we're going to see and continue to see, the more difficult it will be to adapt to the new climate reality, and the more difficult it will be to build resilience. And so these are all connected. We need all of it together urgently to ensure that we're doing everything possible right now to minimize the loss and the damage that is already developing. We know that one of the things that is a very cost-effective way to address both adaptation and mitigation is through investing in nature-based solutions, and this continent has some of the greatest opportunities right now for very cost-effective, smart financing for ensuring resilience and mitigation through investing in nature here in Africa. And that would be my final comment. Thanks.
Thank you. To the point about the 100 billion, we need to see those who promised at at Paris to deliver on the 100 billion and show us how they're going to do it and to do it this year. We also need to address our mitigation needs because we need to tackle the source of the problem. And it's very critical that we leave no one behind. And I think that the point you made about nature-based solutions, about local solutions that help to address the problems, and I think that that was the point made by the gentleman, the more that we can support and see action on the ground and make it relevant for people on the ground, the more that COP28 will be successful. I just want to wrap up by saying that I can't understate the importance of COP28 and this moment that we are in. We're 7 years from Paris. We have 7 years left to 2030. Our North Star is that 1.5 degrees. Because if we go above that 1.5 degrees, it won't matter all the mitigation, all the adaptation action. We're going to be in a very difficult situation. And that's why this moment is critical, because we need to come together in a unified way. The global stocktake gives us that opportunity. We know we're not on track to achieve the 1.5 degree goals, so it means that we have to, at COP28, come forward with game-changing step changes in our action on climate change. And this is the moment, because any project, policy, or plan that is going to make a difference between now and 2030 has to be decided today. We all know that any major policy plan or project that is going to make a change takes 3 to 5 years to be implemented. So if we don't do it today, it's not going to make a difference to the trajectories that we're on. And that means that the sense of urgency is there, and we need you as a community to help us to deliver that sense of urgency to your leaders, to your decision makers, to your people on the ground, so that we start to make a difference, and that has to happen at COP28. So please join us and please help us to deliver that promise that we are making to everybody.
Please join me again in thanking the panelists. Your Excellency Rolf Mazou, Dr. Susan Gardner, Her Excellency Jennifer Morgan, and Your Excellency Ambassador Majid, you have spoken with clarity and with a sense of urgency regarding the need to be able to move to action to respond to the crisis of climate change, particularly as we head towards COP28. And based on what you have said, particularly Ambassador Majid, we are really confident that from Paris to Nairobi to UAE, we will have a much stronger and a much better outcome going forward. I also really want to thank the audience for being with us and sharing your thoughts, your ideas, and your questions. And I want to thank the conveners of this forum, the African Union, the Federal Foreign Office of Germany, Adelphi, and the Republic of Kenya for the work they have done. In closing, I want to announce that Kenya will work very closely with Germany and with other countries on the Climate for Peace initiative. We will work very closely with UAE and with COP28 around the Fragility Pact, and many other critical initiatives in this regard. Thank you very much and have a good evening. Thank you.